Hello there. Welcome to video 125 from Sumit Academy. I do hope that you have subscribed to my channel. Do subscribe now so that you do not miss out on my previous or future videos. And do remember to like and share this video. And if you want to drop in a line, I shall always be available at sumitacademy20 at gmail.com. To make your task a little easier, here is a complete list of all videos available on my YouTube channel. The list is divided into the playlists under which they are available. Do have a look. In this video, we shall study an important milestone towards responsible government in India, and that is the Government of India Act 1935. This act was an important step in introducing an elected government and transformed the political scenario of the country. This act was passed by the British Parliament in 1935 and came into effect in 1937. It paved the way for self-governance in India and originally had two portions: the Government of India Act 1935 and the Government of Burma Act 1935. It was based on a report by a joint select committee led by Lord Linlithgow, set up by the two houses of the British Parliament. The report, in turn, was the result of the Joint Committee's scrutiny of the White Paper, a scheme of constitutional proposals prepared by the British government close on the heels of the Round Table conferences. The Act was one of the lengthiest acts passed by the British Parliament and was written in a legal style organized around 32 sections in 11 parts and 10 schedules. Some of the key features of the Act were the creation of a Federation of India that consisted of two levels: a central executive and parliament, and below it provinces and princely states. It discarded the Dyarchy system at the provincial level and allowed for the emergence of popularly elected provincial legislatures. A federal court was established and franchise was expanded to 14% of the population from 3%. Separate electorates were provided for Muslims, Sikhs, and others, but not to depressed classes. The governor enjoyed critical emergency powers. The main objectives of the Act were to provide self-government to India, to improve and increase the participation of Indians in the functioning of the government, and to implement major recommendations of the Simon Commission, the roundtable conferences, and white papers by the government. Now, this brings me to the events which led to the passing of this act. If you remember your history, you will recall that the Government of India Act 1919 was not well accepted due to its limited provisions on self-governance and restricted approach in granting rights to Indians. This feeling of alienation was further fueled by the enactment of the Rowlatt Act. The infamous Simon Commission was appointed in 1927 to review this act. The commission presented its report in 1930, which was widely condemned by the Indian leadership and led to the consultation of the British government with the Indian leadership through 3 roundtable conferences. The first roundtable conference was held in November 1930 to January 1931 and was boycotted by the Indian National Congress and Indian business leaders. The second was held from September 1931 to December 1931, while the third, held in November-December 1932, was boycotted by the Congress. The British government constituted a joint select committee in 1933 under Lord Linlithgow and based on their report framed the Government of India Act 1935. It received the royal assent on 2nd August 1935 and came into force on the 1st of April 1937. So much for the history behind this act. Let us now move on to the important provisions of the act. The first was the provision for the establishment of an All India Federation consisting of provinces and the princely states. However, this did not work out as the princely states did not join. The states' accession to the federation was voluntary. The terms on which a state joined the Federation of India were to be laid down in an instrument of accession. The rights and obligations of the British Crown in respect of the Indian states were to remain unaffected. The rights and obligations were left in charge of the Crown representative. It was permissible to combine the office of the Governor General and Crown representative in the same person. In both houses of the federal legislature, the states were given their quota of representation. But the members of the state were not to be elected. In spite of such a wide range of provisions, the princes of the native states refused to join the federation. They were alarmed by the changing situation in the country caused by the rapid spread of the national movement. They apprehended that achievement of democratic freedom by the people of British India would undermine the autocratic rule in their own state. They also feared that accession to the federation would bring them under the authority of the federal government of India in some essential matters. The second provision was the introduction of Dyarchy at the center. Under this act, the executive authority of the center was vested in the Governor General on behalf of the Crown. The federal subjects were divided into twofold categories of reserved and transferred subjects. The reserved list comprised of subjects such as administration of defense, external affairs, ecclesiastical affairs, that is, religious affairs, and matters related to tribal areas. These subjects were to be administered by the Governor General at his discretion with the help of 3 councillors appointed by him. They were not responsible to the legislature. The administration of the transferred subject was to be done by Governor General on advice of the Council of Ministers, whose number could not exceed 10. The Council of Ministers had to command the confidence of the legislature. The Governor General could act contrary to the advice of the Council of Ministers if any of his special responsibilities was involved in such act. However, in that case, when an act involved special responsibilities, the Governor General would work under the control and direction of the Secretary of State. Further, the Governor General was also responsible for the coordination of work between the 2 wings and for encouraging joint deliberations between the councillors and the ministers. The third provision was the most remarkable feature of the Act, as it catered for provincial autonomy. With the abolition of Dyarchy at provinces, the entire provincial administration was entrusted to the responsible ministers who were controlled and removed by the provincial legislatures. The provincial governments were wholly responsible to the provincial legislatures, and provinces were free from outside control and interference in a large number of matters. Thus, in the provincial sphere, the Act of 1935 made a fundamental departure from the Act of 1919. This Act divided the powers between the centre and provinces in terms of 3 lists: the federal list for centre with 59 items, the provincial list for provinces with 54 items, and the concurrent list for both with 36 items. Residuary powers were given to the Viceroy. The degree of autonomy introduced at the provincial level was subject to important limitations. The provincial governors retained important reserve powers, and the British authorities also retained the right to suspend responsible government. The fourth important provision of the Act was the provision of a federal court. The Government of India Act 1935 provided for the establishment of a federal court to interpret the Act and adjudicate disputes relating to federal matters. It provided that the federal courts should consist of one Chief Justice and not more than 6 judges. The Federal Court was given exclusive original jurisdiction to decide disputes between the centre and constituent units. Provision was made for filing of appeals from high courts to the federal courts and from federal court to the Privy Council. The federal court also had jurisdiction to grant special leave to appeal. The fifth important provision was the abolition of the Council of India. The Council of India, established by the Government of India Act of 1858, was finally abolished. Instead, the Secretary of State for India at London was provided with a team of advisors in its place. Sixth, extension of franchise. The concept of separate electorates was further extended to women, labourers, and the depressed classes. The Act introduced direct elections in the country and extended voting rights to about 14% of the population. Seventh, the Act established the Federal Railway Authority to regulate the Indian railways. This had 7 members and was free from ministers and councillors. The members of this authority reported directly to the Governor General. The idea was to assure the British stakeholders of the railways that their investment was safe. The eighth important provision was reorganization of the provinces. This included separation of Sindh from Bombay, splitting Bihar and Odisha into separate provinces, complete separation of Burma from India, detachment of Eden from India and establishing it as a separate colony. You see, until 1937, Eden was governed as part of British India and was known as the Eden Settlement. Yes, this is the same Aden of Yemen, which is much in the news for the war raging there. Burma was proposed to be separated in pursuance of the recommendation of the Simon Commission, whose proposal was accepted in principle by the government. Consequently, a Burma Roundtable Conference was held in London in 1932. In 1935, Burma Act was passed and separation of Burma actually took place in 1937. The Government of India Act 1935 also provided a new Burma office in preparation for the establishment of Burma as a separate colony. But the same Secretary of State headed both departments and was styled the Secretary of State for India and Burma. The ninth provision was the setting up of the Federal Legislature. The Federal Legislature was constituted of 2 houses, the Council of State and the Federal Assembly. The Council of State was to be a permanent body with 1/3 of its membership being vacated and renewed triennially. It was to consist of 156 elected members of British India and not more than 104 from the Indian states to be nominated by the rulers concerned. The Federal Assembly, whose duration was fixed for 5 years, was to consist of 250 representatives of British India and not more than 125 members from the Indian states. The members of the Federal Assembly were to be elected indirectly by members of the provincial legislative assemblies on the system of proportional representation with the single transferable vote. The members from the states were to be nominated by the rulers. Residuary legislative powers were vested in the Governor General in the matter of the enlistment of subjects, either in the federal legislative list or the provincial legislative list or the concurrent legislative list. However, the powers of the legislature were confined. The federal legislature was not allowed to deal with the laws affecting the British sovereign or the royal family or matters concerning the Army Act, the Air Force Act, or laws for the amendment to the 1935 Act. Discriminatory legislation against British commercial or other interests was banned. Besides, there were many subjects of importance on which legislation could not be initiated without the prior sanction of the Governor General. Any rejected items of the budget could be placed by the direction of the Governor General before the Council of State. In case of difference between the two houses, the Governor General could summon a joint sitting, and even if a bill was passed by both the houses, he could veto the bill and return it back for reconsideration or reserve it for His Majesty's consideration. The 10th important provision was setting up of the Reserve Bank of India as a federal bank to regulate and control credit and currency of the country. The Act also provided for the establishment of public service commissions at the federal and provincial level and had a provision for a joint PSC for two or more provinces if so desired. Now, these were landmark steps in the unification of the country and laid the basis for easier and smoother administration processes and procedures. Let us now move on to the importance and the impact of the Act on the Indian polity. This Act was a clever blend of progressive and regressive policies. Though the provisions of the Act appeared to be decentralizing and gave the impression of a division of powers, the real power still vested with the British government. The main feature of the Act of 1935 was the provision of the responsible government with safeguards. The Act made the Governor General the pivot of the entire Constitution. The Governor General had the jurisdiction to give unity and to direct different conflicting elements. The Act played a key role in the drafting of the Constitution of India. A significant part of the Constitution, particularly the administrative provisions, are borrowed from this Act. This had led to charges in the Constituent Assembly about the Constitution being foreign and unoriginal. Most scholars view the Act as a significant development in India's constitutional and political history and agree that it was informed by a need to protect British interests rather than promoting self-government in India. Scholars have argued that the Act was arguably the most significant turning point in the history of the British administration in India. The Act was a means of continuation of the British control of India and the deflection of the challenge to the Raj posed by Gandhiji, Nehru, and the nationalist movement. We must remember that the Act was designed to revise the workings but not weaken the realities of British power in India. The Act created general disappointment in all political parties. With innumerable checks, restrictions, reservations, and safeguards, the new Act was still far away from even a responsible measure of self-government. Congress President Dr. Rajendra Prasad criticized the absence of any provision for automatic growth of development of self-government. He further said that it will be a kind of federation in which unabashed autocracy will be entrenched in 1/3 of India and peep in every now and then to strangle popular will in the remaining 2/3. The Muslim League, led by Jinnah, also rejected the federal scheme, describing it as a device to withhold responsibility at the centre. The British government failed to overcome the opposition of the Indian National Congress, the Muslim League, and the princes against the federal scheme. So the federal scheme was withheld, except for the establishment of the federal court, and the provincial scheme was introduced on the 1st of April 1937, causing a drastic change in the pattern of provincial politics. Madan Mohan Malviya said that the statute has somewhat a democratic appearance outwardly, but it is absolutely hollow from inside. Whatever its limitations, this Act of 1935 marked a decisive turning point in India's constitutional history. Parliamentary institutions, even if in a weakened form, were the framework of the new governmental setup. And that is the importance of this Act. Well, that's all from me in this video. This video is based on the information freely available on the internet and various books. No originality is claimed for the same. The intention of this video is only to prepare civil services candidates for answering examination questions on the subject and not for any financial gains. Do like and share this video and do subscribe to my channel now so that you do not miss out on my previous or future videos. And if you wish to drop in a line, I shall always be available at sumitacademy20@gmail.com. Till later then, cheerio.